Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to this army showcase video for my Imperium army known as the Acheron Crusade. Why is it called the Acheron Crusade? Well, because this army collectively is a crusade force out to retake the Acheron sector. At least that's how it is in the narrative. In reality, it's a whole heap of models all on the table at once here for you today. This took ages to get out, and it's probably going to take ages to put back in its cases again, but hey. It's technically 4 armies, really. So, Imperial Guard, Space Marines, Imperial Knights, of which I only have 2 at the moment, but there's a lot more of them on the way, and small force of Adeptus Custodies. I say small force, but it's probably about 2,500 points you're looking at right there. So, yeah, Custodies are expensive. And also, a few auxiliary bits like Sisters of Silence. Got some Tempestus Scions over there, which I haven't based yet. Apologies for that. And I think there's some cheeky little Inquisition guys up there as well. But here it all is. So I was going to do an army showcase video, and I was actually going to start off with just doing my Space Marines to begin with, but then I realised the table was... they didn't really fill the table very well, so I just started getting more and more stuff out. And then eventually I just decided, well, fine, we'll do a showcase video for the entire gosh darned crusade, why not? And here it all is. As you can see, it does quite comfortably fill a table. In total, I don't know how many points it is. It's probably at least 10,000 points. Probably well over that, actually. The Custodies are about 2,500. The Space Marines are just over 4,000. The Imperial Guard and the Knights, goodness me, I have no idea. But there's a lot of them, so you would think probably around 10,000 at least. Nevertheless, it's all here for you guys to look at, for you guys to see. This is all my Imperium models with the exception of my Space Wolves. I do have a Space Wolves army. It's not on the table right now though, because narratively the Space Wolves don't really fit into this army. And I do consider this all to be one kind of army. Even though it's really like 4 separate factions, I do consider it to be one big army, and that's kind of how I built it when I was getting started on this just over a year ago, was when I began this project. If you're curious, yes, I did paint and build 90% of this at least. There are a few bits I didn't build or didn't paint, just a few individual models here and there that I rescued from eBay or something like that. I think 1 or 2 of the tanks I didn't build, but I have painted or repainted. Stuff like that. The Custodies you will have seen before if you're a fan of Winter's channel. I did a battle report with him with these Custodies against his Death Guard, the end of all things. It was a very enjoyable battle report. I do recommend watching it if you haven't already seen it. But yeah, these guys were in that battle, including Big Telemon Dreadnought over there, who, well, kind of embarrassed himself really. That's all I'm going to say. Up here we've got the characters, the commanders, the 3 shield captains, and you know, Vexilla, and I put the little Sisters of Silence squad leader lady up there because Sisters of Silence don't have an HQ unit yet. They will when the new Forge World book for them comes out, I think, but for now they don't, so I just stuck her up there because I've put the little, as you may have noticed, I've put the little commanders on the hills to set them apart from the rest. Here are the Custodies. The only one that's got a name at the moment is the guy in the middle. He's Heracles. Shield Captain Heracles, and the reason he's got a name is because he's done some cool stuff in the past. I generally follow a kind of naming thing for characters, but sort of a convention based on whether or not they've actually done something cool in a game of 40k. Otherwise they don't get names, because that way it just becomes really hard to keep track of. So, yeah, only a few of these guys have names so far, and stuff I've written about them, which we'll get onto in a minute. But, yeah. There he is, Shield Captain Heracles. He's incidentally the one in charge of all this. I do have a Trajan of Loris model as well, but he's not here because he's not really part of this. He'll occasionally turn up in battles, but he's not really part of the Crusade officially. He's got other stuff to do. He's like in charge of all the Custodies after all, so. Here are my Space Marine characters. These 3 captains in the front that you see do have names. Captain Brutus, you've of course already seen in a battle report before. He appeared in the one against Bob's Orcs. He didn't really get to do much interesting in that battle, which is a bit of a shame. That doesn't really fit with his reputation very much. He's done some cool stuff in the past as Brutus. But hey, never mind. We've also got Captain Joseph Garridon, first captain. So he leads the first company. And we've got Octavian Faust on his bike with his massive chainsword. Those are my three captains that I have for this army. They're the so-called triumvirate that leads the Revenants chapter. They don't have a chapter master at the moment. They used to, but they don't anymore. And since no successor has really been officially agreed upon, the chapter's ruled by these three, this kind of triumvirate of the most senior captains in the chapter. So there they are. They're the three guys in charge. Plus we've got some other stuff. We've got the chaplain, we've got the librarian, banner bearer, lieutenants, and so on and so on. And then of course we have the massed ranks of the Imperial Guard. I think there's enough infantry squads here for me to make like 4 battalion detachments if I ever really wanted to. No idea why I'd want to, but nevertheless here they are. That's like 20 command points, I think, isn't it? 4 battalion detachments? I don't know what on earth you'd spend them all on. That's insane. But anyway, here they all are. Plus a load of tanks, plus a couple of super heavy tanks. There's a lot of them. I'm working on even more constantly. And up here on the hill, obviously, you can see the commanders. Basically a big smattering of company commanders, and a commissar, and the standard bearer, and a primaris psyker, and so on and so on. The only 2 characters out of this lot on the top of this hill that have names at the moment are this lady here, Catherine Lasky, Colonel Lasky. She's done some cool stuff in the past, which you'll no doubt learn about in future videos, and that portly gentleman at the back there, that's Benjamin Perkins, or Benjamin Porkins, as the men refer to him as, for reasons I'm sure you can guess, because he's a little bit on the portly side. There you go, that's a much better view. So, yeah, there he is. He's very handy with that shotgun, though, I've got to say. People make fun of him, but he's been around longer than the rest of them. He's quite the veteran. Anyway. So, there's a lot of stuff here. A lot of stuff. So much that I have difficulty keeping track of it, to tell you the truth. It's the first time I've ever got it all out on the table like this, and I'm a little bit impressed at just how much of it I actually have. It doesn't seem like much until you get it all out in here and you realise, holy crap, I have a lot of models. So, of course this isn't my entire 40k collection, as I've said. I've got my Space Wolves as well. But also I've got my non-Imperium armies. I've got my Word Bearers, which you've already seen in a battle report. I've got my Orcs, Tyranids and Necrons as well. So, among other armies too that are in the works. So, anyway, yeah. Here it all is. Loads of stuff. Too much stuff for me to go through individually and talk about, otherwise we'd be here all day. But nevertheless, here it all is. These guys are kind of my pride and joy, ultimately. I do have other armies, but this lot, these are the guys I'd keep if I was forced to chuck out everything else. Let's put it that way. I love them. If it was up to me, I'd play just these guys all the time, probably, but I picked up loads of other armies along the way, because I figured if I'm making YouTube videos, there needs to be a bit of variety. So, but yeah, these guys are kind of my favourites, I gotta be honest. But yeah, loads of stuff here. Stuff that I can't even keep track of, as I said. There's even a wild slime marbo hiding around here somewhere, I think. As well as some Inquisition guys and stuff like that. And like I said, a few little armies that are not really armies yet, but might be someday, like these Tempestus Scions and these Sisters of Silence down here. And honestly, when the Sisters of Battle get released in 2019, sometime next year, hopefully, according to GW, probably going to pick up some of them too, I imagine. Chuck them into the Crusade force as well. So anyway, I've shown you the models. If this is already all you're interested in seeing, I suppose you might as well stop viewing now. That's fine. But the real purpose I made this video for really was to talk about the narrative behind this army. Talk about who they are, where they come from, why they're fighting, and where they're going. And how they got into this mess in the first place. Because the Acheron Crusade is not an ordinary crusade in the 40k universe. It's what's called a penitent crusade. Which means everybody here, basically, has done something pretty bad to warrant getting sent on a penitent crusade. And I want to talk about the history of this army and how they got here. And what it was they did to deserve this fate. Because being on a penitent crusade is probably one of the worst places you can be in the 40k universe. It's not nice. But, so in order to do that, though, I'm going to have to talk at length about a bunch of stuff, particularly for the benefit of you guys who are sort of newish to 40k still. So we're going to have to talk about the Emperor. We're going to have to talk about the history of the Space Marines and the Primarchs a bit and all sorts of stuff. So the second part of this video is basically going to be a kind of story time thing, where I'm going to read you some stuff that I wrote. I've got buckets and buckets and buckets of stuff written about my armies. I am a gigantic nerd like that, I'm afraid. I've always been like that with 40k. Some of which I'd love to share with you guys, but today we're going to talk about these guys, particularly focusing on the Space Marines, because at the end of the day, Space Marines are really at the core of what 40k is. These guys are the ones that drive the narrative and the plot of the Space Marines. They're the most iconic guys in 40k. They're the ones that lie at the centre of its narrative. And they're the ones that lie at the centre of this Crusade's narrative too, ultimately. So there's going to be a lot of focus on them, but don't worry, the Imperial Guard and the other guys will get their day in the sun as well, I'm sure. I tell you the truth, if I'm being really honest with myself, these Imperial Guard, they might not be the prettiest army I own, they might not be the best painted army I own, but they're still kind of my favourites. I've been an Imperial Guard fan ever since I read Gaunt's Ghosts back in the day, so they're my favourite children, I have to admit, even though I basically have to watch them all die in every single game I play because they drop like flies. But hey, that's the fate of an Imperial Guard player. But anyway, I digress. So, grab a cup of tea, get in a comfy seat, maybe put this on in the background while you do some work, and listen in. And of course, if you only wanted to see the models and you're not interested in my self-indulgent nerd nonsense, then thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. But for the rest of you, yeah, just get comfy and listen in for like about 15 minutes or so.
When the Emperor of Mankind first unified the nations of Earth under his banner, he created the Space Marines, also known as the Adeptus Astartes. Their task was to reconquer the shattered remains of humanity's once great empire and safeguard it against threats from both without and within. There were 22 legions, each with their Primarch, all of them bioengineered genetic sons of the Emperor himself. The creation of this vast army would later come to be known as the First Founding. After the Horus heresy, when fully half of the legions turned on the Emperor and waged a bloody civil war that burnt the new Imperium to cinders, things changed. The Emperor himself was mortally wounded in the Siege of Terra and imprisoned upon the life support systems of the Golden Throne. As the traitors retreated from the scene of their defeat, the Emperor's remaining loyal sons presided over a shattered empire surrounded by enemies. It was decided that never again should one man have the power to command an entire legion of Space Marines, and as a result, most of the loyal legions were permanently divided into a multitude of smaller armies known as chapters, each one consisting of roughly 1,000 Astartes. Enough to burn entire sectors if needs be, but not half the galaxy. This event was known as the Second Founding. Over the 10,000 years that have followed, there have been dozens of other foundings as new Space Marine chapters are created by the Imperium to meet new threats, and to replace those which are inevitably destroyed. Some of these subsequent foundings have particularly dark reputations, however, such as the 13th Founding, which later became known as the Dark Founding. The most infamous of all, however, came with the turn of the 36th millennium. The 21st Founding, now known by most as the Cursed Founding, was the largest founding of Space Marine chapters since the end of the Horus Heresy. But, more importantly, it was in this founding that the Gene Seed, the miraculous genetic material originally created by the Emperor, was tampered with. It's unclear whether the intentions behind this were good or evil, but the servants of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, saw fit to make improvements to the Emperor's work. The result was an unmitigated disaster, either through incompetence or insidious sabotage. Of all the Space Marine chapters created in the 21st Founding, the vast majority fell to the ruinous powers of chaos, turned renegade, suffered with horrific mutations, or met improbably tragic ends as fate itself seemed to conspire against them. Only a select few have survived into the present day, Still fighting, still loyal to the Emperor, viewed with mistrust and suspicion by even their brother Space Marines from other chapters. Even among these remaining loyalists, however, more continue to be destroyed or fall from grace. This is the story of one of those chapters, known as the Revenants. It's the story of how they betrayed the Imperium, and how they fight to earn its forgiveness. When the originally titled Marines Revenant were created in M36, they were given lordship over a world known simply as Boneyard. This ancient planet was something of a graveyard of past civilizations and attempts at colonization. Its inhabitants were reduced to eking out a brutal and primitive existence in the vast, radiation-baked deserts and ancient tunnels of chrome and copper that honeycomb the planet's crust. Generations live and die far from the sun, in the ancient subterranean ruins of past civilizations, while others brave the horrors of mutation and radiation storms the size of continents, living as nomads upon great spider-like agricultural machines now turned into mobile towns in the shifting rad sands of the surface. The Marines Revenant made their home far in the north, constructing a vast polar fortress known as Journey's End, and set about governing their star system as best they could. The Boneyard was picked with a specific purpose in mind. First, its primitive but rugged population made for a steady source of tough recruits for the chapter. And secondly, because the Boneyard is one of a ring of worlds around a huge warp storm known as the Dark Maw. The Maw has long been a source of chaos incursions upon the Imperium in the region, and entire worlds and chapters of Space Marines were marshalled to stand watch over its borders. The Revenants were counted amongst these forces, and they dutifully stood their vigil for 4,000 years. Things, however, were about to take a turn for the worse. In the closing days of the 41st millennium, the gathering storm brewed. Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade was beginning. The Tyranid Hive Fleet scoured entire sections of the galaxy bare, alien hunger devouring entire sectors whole. The ancient Necrontyr are awakening from their 65 million year slumber, and in the corner of the Imperium the Revenants called home, the Dark Maw was restless. Incursions of demons and traitor warbands from its depths increased year by year, and the storm itself seemed to be swelling in size, slowly but surely. Then, in a single moment, the galaxy cried out in horror and terror and pain, and everything went dark. The lights went out. The Astronomicon, the psychic beacon on Terra that guides all of humanity's spacefaring vessels through the warp, sputtered and died. The Noctis Eterna had begun. A great rift tore open across the galaxy as the Immaterium, home to the galaxy's collective waking nightmares, spilled into real space. Isolated and cut off from communication and travel, humanity's worlds fell like wheat before the scythe. Meanwhile, the Maw, guarded for millennia by the Marines Revenant, exploded outwards. And riding this great wave came hordes of demonic hosts, legions of traitors, heretics, and the damned. In response to this threat, the Revenants consolidated their entire chapter's strength around the few worlds they stood guard over, and prepared to dig in and weather the storm for as long as possible. Several Imperial Guard regiments were requisitioned for this purpose, with some commanders being threatened with execution if they failed to comply with the orders of their Space Marine masters. After some negotiation, the services of a local night world ruled by House Monroe were also enlisted into these efforts. The new order was draconian, even by Imperial standards. But as they say, desperate times call for desperate measures, and this only became worse as various revolts and uprisings began to break out on formerly loyal worlds, either through the influence of the ruinous powers, or because of fanatical Imperial cultists believing the Noctis Eterna to be the punishment of an angry god-emperor for his faithless subjects. The last communication the Revenants received before the veil descended was news of the fall of Cadia and the Despoiler's Black Crusade. With the Astronomicon now gone, the assumption of most of the Revenants' high command was that Holy Terror had finally fallen. Despite the protests of the Reclusium and its chaplains, the Imperium, as they had once known it, was no more. It was every man for himself. So when agents of the Holy Inquisition in the region made their presence known and demanded that the Space Marines and their allies submit to their authority, things became complicated. The Revenants, as they saw it, had but one duty left to them, with Terra destroyed and the Emperor gone, and that was simply to defend humanity. Or at least, defend their own corner of it. This little cluster of worlds entrusted to them 4,000 years ago. A Space Marine's duty is, in its most basic form, to simply defend mankind. And that's what they intended to do. The Inquisition, on the other hand, demanded their obedience as agents of the God Emperor himself, and ordered the Revenants to redeploy the vast majority of their forces to elsewhere in the region to defend more strategically important assets. Doing so, however, would leave their homeworlds utterly defenseless against the predations of alien and traitor threats alike. The Inquisition did not care. It was an acceptable sacrifice, a calculation in the ongoing arithmetic of survival. The Revenants refused. It's unknown who fired the first shot. The Inquisition does not have a reputation for leniency, especially in times of crisis, but equally the Revenants were stubborn and cornered, and were never friends of the Inquisition even in more civilized times. Fighting quickly broke out between both parties, along with the Imperial Guard regiments and Imperial Knights that were sworn to the Space Marine service. All over the galaxy, humanity, in its terror and madness, was eating itself alive, and the Battle of the Boneyard was no exception. Of course, the Noctis Aeterna did not, despite its name, last forever. Eventually, the Astronomicon returned. The shattered Imperium began to knit itself back together, and Rabute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, was leading the charge. When the veil of darkness was lifted, when the Revenants realized that they were wrong, that Terra had not fallen, that the Imperium was not doomed just yet, their reaction was a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that the end of days was not upon them, and horror at the sudden realization of their crimes. They had betrayed and murdered agents of the Emperor in their desperation to survive, and a reckoning was now due. That the entire chapter was not liquidated for their sins is nothing short of a miracle. Some suspect the direct involvement of the Primarch Guilliman in this. He is well known for holding the lives of loyal Space Marines as sacred. Whether the Revenants could indeed be considered loyal at this point is questionable. But they were ready, willing to fight, and they were desperate for atonement. So, with the stroke of an official quill, it was decided. The incumbent Chapter Master Sulla was spared, though relieved of his command, and exiled into the service of the Inquisition as a member of the Death Watch. The rest of the chapter, along with the various Imperial Guard regiments that sided with them, and the Knights of House Monroe, were sentenced to a 200-year penitent crusade. Their task? To retake the vast Acheron sector, a once valuable Imperial asset now laid waste by the events of the Noctis Aeterna. It was a task that would take generations to complete, assuming any of the Crusaders survived the ordeal. For a penitent crusade is not designed as a means of taking vital assets. It is a means of punishment. The Revenants and their allies will likely die a slow, bleeding death fighting for worlds of little consequence against overwhelming odds. Some might consider this an unfair fate, but in the Imperium, it's hardly a unique one, especially now. The Acheron Crusade marches on through the void. For 150 years, men and women have fought and died under its banner. Generations have been born in blood and fire and darkness, tempered like steel in battle, only to die by the thousands, more fuel for the unstoppable war machine. For the commanders that sit on the War Council, there is no option but to press on, to make the most of their dwindling resources, to preserve the lives of their soldiers as best they can in an unending war of attrition across 100 systems. Sometimes that means sacrificing 1,000 troops so 100,000 more might survive. Sometimes the sacrifice is much greater than that. But they cannot waver. They cannot question their duty, for among them stands a small cadre of the Emperor's personal warriors, the Adeptus Custodies, sent to ensure the Crusade's loyalty. And in the shadows, the agents of the Inquisition silently observe and scheme. To some amongst the Inquisition's ranks, this punishment was far too light, far too lenient. It is a mistake that needs to be corrected. And at the heart of the Crusade remain the Revenants, a chapter of divided loyalties, of bitter resentment, and of hushed secrets. After all, every one of the cursed chapters of the 21st founding carried their own strange genetic quirks and mutations. The tampering of the tech priests responsible was reckless and widespread. So far, the Revenants have exhibited no outward signs of mutation, but the truth, they have long since discovered, tells a different story. But that tale is for another time. Upon the bridge of their flagship, the battle barge Season Unending, there stands an obsidian statue of the first chapter master of the Marines Revenant, sat upon his throne, gazing out at the void. On its base is a plaque with an inscription penned by an unknown author. It reads as follows: "Attired with stars, we shall forever sit, triumphing over death and chance and time." Time, unfortunately for the Revenants, for the Crusade, for the Imperium, and for mankind, seems to be running out. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. There is no peace amongst the stars, only the laughter of thirsting gods.